Hello, namaste. Within Indian philosophies, there's always been debate about these two main non dual schools, which are seemingly very different from each other in its approach, in their beliefs, and in how they live their life. But yet, there is a same thread of thought between these two schools because both of them are pointing to the non dual truth. Both of them speak about eradication of suffering, and both of them say that the root problem is ignorance. In my book, Breaking Free from Karma, I have discussed briefly about both of them, and I've also pointed to some extent the similarity between these two schools. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the two main non dual schools philosophies from India. One is Vedanta, especially Advaita Vedanta, and another one is Buddhism, as in Madhyamika Buddhism or the Vajrayana Buddhism, mainly referred to as Shunyavada or even Vijnanavada to some extent. Now let us quickly reevaluate how are they different and what are the similarities between them. Now, when we look at it from a scholarly perspective, there is a lot of difference, and no scholar, whether they are from Vedantic background or from the Vajrayana background, will ever agree that they're pointing to the same thing. Although they might actually say that they've come close, they are nearly there to each other, but they will not directly agree that they're pointing to the same thing. We can see the similarity from a practitioner point of view, from our own understanding and realization. But it is very hard to see the similarity if you look merely from the scholarly perspective. So I'll make a little attempt here to give you a bit of understanding on how they are actually not different from each other. Firstly, let us look at their approaches. The Buddha talked about initially the Wheel of Samsara. Of course, he spoke about the Four Noble Truths, but then he spoke about also this Wheel of Samsara and how we are caught in this cycle, and that our continuous actions of the past will create the results in the future and it keeps us bound. And he pointed out there that ignorance was one of the main factors, avidya as it's called. Now, taking that further, when we look at it, he also went ahead to refute what is called as anatma. He refuted atma and said that this concept and theory of atma is wrong, and so he preached anatma, opposite of atma. Now, if we look at it literally from that perspective, this entity that he was referring to, who is caught in this wheel of samsara, from a Vedantic perspective, is nothing but the jiva, which goes through transmigration. Now, when he took it a step further and pointed out as anatma, what he was actually trying to refute was not so much atma as is known in Vedanta, but it is the Atma that is that entity which Vedanta calls as the ego. So effectively, he was refuting the ego when he called as an Atma. Now let us take the next step, which Buddha actually pointed out, which is more prevalent in the teachings of Vajrayana. And in teachings such as Dzogchen, we hear words such as Rigpa, pristine mind, pure mind. When we look at pristine and pure mind, it is differentiated from the normal mind. It is not the egoic mind, the conceptual thinking mind that is referred to. That kind of mind, the pristine, pure mind that is inherent with us, which is almost equated to as saying that it is never born, it's always been there, it is always pure, it can never be tainted, is more or less the same language that is used for Atma in Vedanta. Now, the confusion here comes because from the Vedanta perspective, this stepping stone which Buddhism takes, especially in Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism, is this aspect of emptiness, shunyata. In one of the famous quotes, it is said that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. When we look at it from a literal translation, and this is where the problem has come, because if you look at it only from that literal sense, you would actually equate emptiness with void or nothing. But that is not what is meant by it. And you will hear this from any teacher of Buddhism who will actually immediately say that no, that was not just what was meant. Of course, in some teachings such as Nagarjuna, where he refutes that, takes the four Chatuskoti kind of argument, where he refutes there is something, there isn't something, there is both is also not there, and there is neither is also not there. So that kind of argument is used. So that would easily make one think that he was actually referring to just the voidness. Well, in some extent, that sense of void was a stepping stone for us to go beyond this conceptualized mind. The sense of appearances not having a reality, what we call as Jagat Mithya, is actually what is taken as by emptiness. First stepping stone there that Buddha laid down was to point to this emptiness. But this emptiness was never pointed out as just void. It was actually seen from there is where he laid the stepping stone, next step for nirvana, the cessation of suffering, or the nirvana, where the blissful, resplendent, and luminous mind that he talked about. And the teachings which comes across very strongly in what is called as Rigpa, or nature of mind teachings. So this nature of mind teachings is not that aspect of mind or the ego aspect, because most people think, oh, Buddhism stopped at the mind. No, that is not the fact. This aspect of nature of mind is pointing to one's own inner nature, that awareness, that consciousness, which is pure, which is untainted, and it is not the personal consciousness that is talked about here, which is that ego or the identity of that self, but it is that the entity which is ever existing, and it is that substratum which is discussed about in Vedanta. It is again depending on personalities. People find different teachings and different practices helpful, but the teachings as such are not different. So from a practitioner point of view, we can benefit from both. And for our own understanding, our own realization, and our own experiential understanding, both Vedanta and Buddhism can actually be effective. There are, however, practices laid down in the initial stages, such as the Eightfold Path, and a lot of practices like which we see today, such as mindfulness. Now, those were aspects to help stabilize the mind. So they necessarily are not talking about or pointing right away at the final truth. But in the same way, Vedanta also takes that same step, which is called as Chitta Shuddhi. So there are practices, there are upasanas, and certain steps that one goes through before one comes to this final understanding and realization of that ultimate truth. So I hope this gives a better perspective and enables us to appreciate each other philosophies. And of course, you can find a little bit more about this in my book, Breaking Free from Karma, where I have discussed some aspects of this. Thank you so much.